Hello and welcome to Contra Mundum. I am your host, Susanna Eileen Martin. Today, I have a special guest. Can you introduce yourself for my audience?
I am Dr. Brenda Ayres.
Hey, this is Mrs. Ayres. Dr. Ayres, I'm sorry. She just shot me daggers. This is Dr. Ayres. She works at my school, Liberty University. And what do you teach here?
Well, I'm in the English department, but I'm also one of the assistant directors in the honors program.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Dr. Ayres is actually who I was emailing a couple of weeks ago when I was trying to get my honors thesis-y things fixed up. The goal of the show, as you guys know, is everyone is an expert at something, and Mrs. Ayres, Dr. Ayres, is an actual is an actual expert. She writes books for a living and teaches, of course. So today I want to talk about Can you tell me about your first book, the first thing that you published, the first thing that you wrote?
Well, first of all, I got to clarify that I don't earn my living through writing. I wish I did. I earn my living through teaching. Writing, for me, has never paid very well, but that doesn't matter. I really love doing it. My first book was actually my dissertation. I completely revised it, and I was really surprised. It was so easy to get a publisher. I got it published right away. It was called Dissenting Women in Dickens Novels, The Subversion of Domestic Ideology. So an academic book, and was published back in 1992, and it was the first of several academic books.
Awesome. Thank you. That's cool. So you have written some novels. You haven't published any, right? Can you tell me a little bit about what the publishing world was like for you when you first published your book and how you see things changing now?
Since most of my books are academic, I can speak about that market. I think it was much easier to publish back in the 1990s. It's incredibly competitive now, mainly because the book market is in really poor condition. And so many publishers have gone out of business, and so many big publishers have been publishing since the 19th century have gone under or have been subsumed by other companies. For example, one publisher who had published several of my novels or books was Pickering and Chatto, which began in the 1800s. And it was bought out by, I think, Rutledge, which has been bought out by another conglomerate, which makes me very sad because it no longer carries its the same mission, and it pretty much is going to market only those books that will sell. Now, I understand that if I were a publisher, I really would need my books to sell to stay in business. But the nice thing about Pickering and Chatto was it wanted to bring back into print novels by women, especially, that had fallen out of the market. And so once they were brought back in an academic style, meaning that they were indexed and annotated so that a contemporary reader could understand them. They didn't make much money, but they did such a service for scholarship. But they can't do that anymore. People don't want to buy books anymore. And they don't want to pay money for them. And academic books have just gotten so incredibly expensive. To give you an example, I put out an academic edition of Frances Trollope's 4 of her novels. And to buy them, you can't buy them separately. You have to buy them in a set. And it costs almost $700 for the set. Even I can't afford to buy my own books. And I put out another set of her novels, and they are over $1,000. So I don't blame people for not wanting to buy books that cost that much money. I have a book that's coming out in March that's over $112. And that's even for paperback.
Wow, that's That's a lot of money for a book. You know, it's really interesting to talk about kind of the publishers that have been disappearing throughout the years. One of the things that I notice in my circles is that independent books are getting really popular now, whereas the bigger companies have been publishing things that are like they're good, but a lot of they publish what they think will sell, which works sometimes, but they also sort of ignore people who might be good if they just had a little bit of a push, where instead now they're just kind of being pushed under the rug. And that's one of the reasons that indies have been getting really popular, and Amazon has been huge for the publishing world, because not only have they in particular pushed out those companies, but they've been like becoming their own basically publishing company where anybody can publish. What do you think about the idea that anyone can publish a book these days?
I don't like self-publishing. I've read quite a few books that have not gone through the rigorous editorial process that we become familiar with in traditional publishing. And I think they're poorly written. So many typos get through, very poor writing. And I'm at a point where I won't spend my money on books that are self-published. I understand the process, and it sounds as if I'm a hypocrite because I self-published my first Christian nonfiction book, but I really regretted doing it. It's not selling well, and I don't have the time to market it, but I thought that I produced a really, really good book, and it has some typos in it that I didn't discover until down the road. And I'm just so embarrassed that it's in print with those typos. If people can self-publish and produce a really quality product, that's one thing, but I'm just not seeing it happen. Now, I'm not a wide reader of self-publishing, but the books I have read, I've been extremely disappointed in, and I really appreciate what happens to a book when it is in the hands of a traditional publisher and all of the very rigorous editorial process that it goes through, so that when it comes out is in very good condition and reads well and is grammatically and mechanically correct.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what the process is like for like editing a book that you would put out, and sort of what you go through along the way? What are your thoughts, emotions, that kind of thing as you go along?
When I send a proposal to a publisher, or even if a publisher contacts me with a proposal, it's going to go through what we call peer review. Now, again, I'm talking about academic books. The publisher will ask me for a list of experts in the field. Here lately, I'm publishing a lot of Mary Wollstonecraft. So my books are going to be read by people who published already on Mary Wollstonecraft. And those readers just tear apart whatever you said to them. And I think in many ways it's good. It forces you to see things that you wouldn't have seen on your own. And they really are trying to make sure that you have integrity in what you write, and that you are covering all of your bases, and you're very, very well researched in what you have to say, and you avoid logical fallacies and so forth. But it's a painful experience. Nobody pats you on the back. No one takes the time to say, oh, this is really great, or that was a great point. Instead, they just tear it to pieces. And you've got to have tough skin for that and say, thank you very much. That really gives me ideas of how I can fix problems before they are in print. If you survive that process, if the peer reviews recommend to the publisher that the publisher should give you a contract, that's just the beginning of people reading your work and pointing out the problems, the errors. And you've got to have a humble spirit about it and appreciate that they're taking the time and they're using their skills and expertise to help you produce the best book that you can produce. But I know a lot of people who are very egotistical, who are writers, who cannot stand that process and cut it short and don't get published.
Yeah, one of the things I learned really early on when I was writing is that if you can't handle criticism, you don't belong in this field. If you can't do it, then it's just you're never going to get any better. If you stink, and everyone stinks when they start. Reading my first book makes my eyes bleed. But if you cannot handle the criticism to realize that yes, this needs help, then you'll never get better, and no one's ever going to want to read your stuff. So that's I love that you talked about that, because that's something that a lot of authors in particular really need to learn. I started the writing club here at Liberty, and one of the things that we do is we do critique for our different writing prompts that we do. I mean, I've seen people who can take it really well, and actually most of the people in my group take it really well. And then I've seen people that just like don't want to hear that they need fixing something. And even if it's a small thing, like you want to get to the best that you can be. And if you can't handle criticism, then you'll never be the best that you can be. So moving on, I kind of want to talk about some of your fiction books. I know you said you haven't published them yet, but can you tell me a little bit about what those books are about? Sort of what was your inspiration for writing them?
Well, it has been about 3 decades since I have worked on fiction, but I really like books that have psychological insight and mystery to them as well, and strong women characters. I really love a good story, though. I want a page turner, and I think all of the books that I've written, the 4 that I want to get published after I retire, are the kind that will inspire people to want to go from chapter to chapter to chapter, that there's some kind of mystery. Of course, there's going to be conflict. If there's no conflict, there's no story. But I really want them engaged in my characters, and I want the characters, especially the strong women, to be a voice for people who are going through similar situations. And at the very end, we'll have some kind of resolve to their problems so that they can come away from the book with some hope for themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about the independent books and self-published books. One of the things that I notice when I read like indies or self-published is that a lot of them they don't have a story. They have like a message they want to get out, but they just don't take the time to actually form their story correctly. And that's one thing that's always annoyed me, because you really just need to figure out how your story's going to go first. Like, I know you've got a message, but no one's going to want to read about your message if you don't have a good story. So you think your stories have, you think your books have good stories?
I do. I love a good story. When I was a kid, I used to make all the other kids on my block listen to my stories. I was always a storyteller. I decided to become a writer when I was in the 4th grade, and I was reading Walter Farley's Black Stallion books. And I have always loved reading, but it hit me that one day I would love to give that kind of enjoyment to other people. He was a wonderful storyteller, and if there's a message, it is very subtle. What really, really got you through the book was the story. And I teach literature. I love good stories. Jane Austen was a Christian. Her father was clergy, and but she believed that you could not preach or should not preach in a book. She said she would like to preach sermons in her novels without quoting scripture. And that's what she did. People love Jane Austen. They love the stories. They love the characters. And yet they probably don't realize that they really are learning a lot about God's love and his morality and his righteousness without being preached to. And I think that she was just, you can learn a lot from her. And I would like to do that too. I would like to be God's instrument and speak God's kingdom through fiction writing without people really realizing that's what I'm doing.
That's great. I really like that. One of the first mistakes that I made when I first started writing, and I realize it now, but at the time I didn't realize what I was doing, was I was really preachy with my very first book. Like it's sort of a Christian fiction type thing, but I didn't realize at the time how preachy I was being until I read it like a year later. I was like, wow, that's really on the nose. Maybe I could let my story speak for it instead of just having my character spout off scripture at everyone who stops to listen for 5 seconds. Because that's the kind of thing that'll put off not only someone who isn't a Christian, but also someone who is and just doesn't want to be preached at in their fiction book that they're trying to read. Let's see. I think that's about all the time we have for today. I've really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for talking to me, and for all of those who want to write. May I just say just a couple of things?
Go for it.
I think it's really important to learn the craft. There are many, many people who have stories to tell and have imagination and want so much to write and be published. But if you don't learn the craft, the skill of writing, including, grammar and mechanics, you gotta learn those. Those are the tools of your trade. You're never going to get published, or you're going to self-publish, and it's throwing money to the wind. So I would encourage the people who read your blog to take classes, creative writing classes. I'm a big believer in them. I took about 12 of them. Yeah, I earned my master's in creative writing. Learned so many things that other people have to learn the hard way through being rejected by publishers. As you said, you started up a writers club. I organized a writers guild when I lived in Georgia, and we writers workshopped each other's work. That is so important. Writing is a collaborative process. It may be really clear to you what you want to write and say, but communication is a two-way street. And you need to be able to hear from other people what works and what doesn't work in your writing. So if you don't take classes, join some kind of writers club, go to creative writing conferences, and learn everything you can about the trade. And I just pray that God will bless you and use you. We need some good Christian writers out there. It is a market that is desperate for good writers. So I hope you'll be one of those.
All right, thank you so much. I definitely agree about the importance of writing clubs. Since I started the club year and a half or 2 years ago, it's been amazing to me to see the people that are in the club just grow and expand as they go through our workshops and get critique for their writing. And like in particular, one of my friends has just gotten so much better at writing, and it's just really, really cool to see. Thank you so much for joining me this week. And for all of my listeners, thank you guys for joining us, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.